A very warm welcome, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining us. We are thrilled to have you all with us today in what is probably a very busy week for many of us who are really working in the space of gender equality. And we would like to take the opportunity to start off this meeting, which is more around talking about accountability and transparency later on. But we cannot start without saying a big thank you to all the actions that have been taken throughout this week, and especially on International Women's Day. And this session today is also really celebrating and thanking our partners, and particularly the business community and the stock exchanges around the world that have really participated again in the Ring the Bell activities 2021. So before we start our session for today, what we just want to do is kick us off with some positive energy and celebrating that 103 stock exchanges have participated in the Ring the Bell this year, in 37 from the Asia Pacific region, which we are extremely proud of. So Teddy, help us to get some impression what happened in our region on Ring the Bell on International Women's Day. If technology wants, we are about to see a very encouraging and engaging video in 1 second.
Gender equality is good for businesses, companies, communities, and society at large. By promoting policy and best practices to encourage female participation, we are giving women a voice and a chance to make an impact in the corporate world.
Trong 17 mục tiêu phát triển bền vững của Liên Hợp Quốc, thúc đẩy, hưởng ứng và hành động vì bình đẳng giới đang ngày càng trở nên quan trọng tại Việt Nam trong bối cảnh phát triển và hội nhập.
The European Union has gender equality as one of the core values. It is also a universally recognized human right. In our current policies, the European Union consider gender equality as a key priority, not only in our internal policies in Europe, but also as part of our external action.
BSC will continue to work with various agencies, including the listed companies, the government and the regulators, to improve the representation of women in every walk of running of businesses.
Women and girls represent half of the world's populations and therefore half of its potentials. Gender equality can give a massive boost to the economy, lead to better human and social conditions as well as peaceful community.
เพศเนี่ยผมคิดว่าเป็นอิชชูที่ส่งเสริมให้คนเก่งคนดีต่างๆเนี่ยได้ทำในสิ่งที่เขาเหมาะสมนะครับตามความสามารถตามศักยภาพของเขา
When we support gender equality, we're actually sending a message to the market, and we will attract better talents, a diverse workforce, grow your knowledge, grow your experience, and more importantly, take charge of your careers.
The time is now for gender equality.
Gender equality means business, but we need to do more.
We can't just imagine it, we have to create it.
By what we say, what we do,
What we measure, how we lead.
Business has no gender.
Take action now and send a strong signal that we
are
a generation
equality.
What a great opening of a session where we're going to be talking about accountability and transparency, which sounds a very dry topic, but I can assure you we're going to have a really interesting panel and we're going to take an interesting perspective on it as well. Before we're going to start this and before I go into the session and really introduce our exciting speakers, I would love to just start with you out there and see who is in the room today with us. So take out your Slidos. I'm sure by now people know how that works. Just go to slido.com. Oh, we're trying to get us in and we want to hear from you on who's in the room, from where you're joining us. Just a second, and in the spirit of hybrid events, there's always a technical issue which has to happen, but slowly we're gonna get there. So slido.com, hashtag UN Women, or you're gonna be also taking just your phone and QR or scan the QR code. That should help you as well. Let's see if you have a very technology enabled community or not. Here we go. So one person, probably one of our colleagues, to keep us a little bit of time. We'll start to get see some companies joining us, some academia, stock exchanges. Yes, we are glad you are in the room. So some of our CSO partners. And we've also asked you a question if you're on there, if you want to talk accountability and transparency, with who do we need to talk? Who needs to be involved in the conversations? I love the everyone, which is great. But I also see private sector in here, governments. I see indicators. Yes, we're going to be talking about indicators today. Boards, business owners, policymakers. So I think we can just kick it off and slowly we will see more from where people join us, but also geographically, I think very strongly. Sorry, we have a lot of participants from Asia, and this is for a good reason. Excuse me. The program, the session today is brought us by WeEmpowerAsia, and I know many of you in the rooms when I look at the participants list, but certainly also our panel and speakers today have been very strongly involved in WeEmpowerAsia, which is a program which is funded by the European Commission and has the ultimate objective to get more women into business, get more women to lead and participate equally in 7 countries across Asia and the Pacific. And obviously we want to expand this into more countries, and we're seeing already the ripple effects into more countries happening. So as I said, we are really thrilled to have you all here today. And the program WeEmpowerAsia is midterm now. And one of the things we have learned over the past couple of months, working with a lot of you, particularly also with the business communities, particularly on one program that is really anchored within WeEmpowerAsia, which is really the program on the Women's Empowerment Principles, is about engaging private sector companies and businesses to become more gender inclusive. And one question many businesses ask, how do we measure it? How can we be held accountable for what we are doing? How can we really benchmark us with others? How can we see and track the change that's happening in our organizations? So the Women's Empowerment Principles, for the ones in the room that are not aware what this is a framework of 7 guiding principles that really help companies, businesses, industry associations to really look at their value chains, starting from leadership, looking into the workplaces, into the marketplaces, but also into the wider community approach on how to really build a more gender inclusive business community or economy for women. So this is our frame that we have been working on. And today's conversation is very strongly about what you see, and we call WEPs principle number 7, about measuring and reporting. So what we have been doing over the past couple of months, a lot of hard work has gone into this with our valued partner, Value for Women. And we have conducted a research on landscaping, and we are in the phase of finalizing this, but we thought it would be a good momentum in the week of International Women's Day to give you a sneak preview on a research that really sets us the frame and helps us to understand how can we accelerate really the implementation of the women's empowerment principles in ASEAN countries, but also in the wider Asian and Pacific geographies. And we've really looked into more detail who has to play which role and what can be done and who needs to do what. So I would like to introduce and hand over to Luis Marquez, who is the Gender and Private Sector Advisor for Value for Women and a very true and honored partner for UN Women, and we really value the great work that you have been doing on this, and we are looking forward to hear a bit more and share us some of the first findings. There will be a bigger session on a deeper session on the research, but over to you, Luis, to share a little bit more with us.
Thank you, Katya, and hi everybody. You can hear me okay? Katya, will you give me a
perfect thumb up?
Okay, thank you. So yes, as Katya said, today we have a very ambitious report, and it will be published in the following weeks. So today we are going to give you an overview of it, but we know we are going to go through some content relatively fast, and so happy for you to reach out to us, ask us questions, ask questions in the chat as well. And we might get to it later today too. So just please reach out. We know that there might be questions about how we did what we did, or how we got to the findings or ideas, etc. So really happy to hear from you as we go through this. So let's start with what is this report? What did we set out to do? That's okay, Amy. Keep it at the Women's Empowerment Principles for a minute. I just want to leave the Women's Empowerment Principles up on the slide for a moment, because I know some of you might not be that familiar with them. So just soak them in as I talk, which are the seven principles. And so what we set out to do is to create a report that provides policymakers, companies, and workers, civil society, and advocacy organizations from ASEAN with guidance and good practice for reporting and implementing WEPs-related policies, actions, and programs. And and behind the report is the importance of transparency and reporting. And so what we set out to do was to basically, one, look at create a new framework for the public sector that matches the private sector women's empowerment principles, right? That you can see here that were created by UN Women and other UN actors for the private sector. And so we created a matching framework for the public sector. And then we also looked at, well, what are companies and stock exchanges in the region? What are they doing? What are they reporting on? And what are some good practices? And all of this culminates in some recommendations. Okay, so next slide, please. So why is this important? Why this focus on reporting, on transparency, on both the public sector and the private sector? Well, increasing transparency on business practices is good in itself, but we think it foments gender inclusion by creating benchmarks so that companies can compare progress against their peers. And this is the same for countries as well. And it identifies good practices and new standards of transparency, right? So as we foment more transparency, more reporting, we know more about what's happening, and we are able to elevate the standard as we move forward. Next slide, please. And so what's innovative about the report? Well, one, we have a single conceptual framework of national commitments, laws, and policies, which we call the WEP policy roadmap for ASEAN member states. So we have, again, for each of the WEPs, we have certain actions, programs, et cetera, that we assess, and we provide this assessment for each of the countries. And we're also able to get a regional view of what's going on in ASEAN. And in the private sector, we looked at 75 publicly listed companies, normally the biggest companies in each stock exchange. And we looked at what are they reporting on, what in their annual reports, sustainability reports with regards to gender. And then we also looked at what are stock exchanges and regulators doing in the region. And we combine all of this to provide, to inform recommendations for reporting and for action on the public sector, so that on the public sector, we provide recommendations on this roadmap and guidance so that governments can improve the enabling environment for gender action in the private sector, and so that companies have some guidance on what's the minimum standard of what they can report on. And Katya will talk about that later on. Next slide, please. So okay, so what's this roadmap for the public sector? Let's go through what it is and what's the content. The next slide. So what it does is we provide an assessment of public policies to promote gender equality in the private sector for each member state. Obviously, we can we benchmark that across different member states, and we provide all all the indicators in one place and a scorecard for each country, so they can see how they perform on certain indicators. And then obviously all of this, the reason we call it a roadmap is because all of this, we really see this as a roadmap for focus areas where member states can improve and think about how they can improve reporting as an impetus for action. The next slide, please. So this is pretty dense, but what we have here is on the left side, we have the assessment guidelines, basically the content. What did we look at when we looked at the public sector policies for each of the women's empowerment principles? What did we look at? And on the other side, we have the recommended actions from UN Women for the private sector in each of these women empowerment principles. So we're just going to focus on the left side, but then you can see how they match. So what we set out to do is, okay, so WEP, for example, in WEP 1, it's about high-level corporate leadership and commitment. So in the case of the private sector, that means making a public commitment on gender equality, developing a gender strategy, having a vision of gender equality. So in the public sector, we looked at commitments that member states have made in ASEAN gender-related declarations, the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. But we also looked at gender responsive budgeting. For those of you that don't know, that basically identifies in public budgets the amount spent on gender-related issues and issues that are seeking to redress gender inequalities and promote women's empowerment, and then seeks to provide governments not only with identification of that spend, but obviously to take action to increase and improve that spending. So we looked at what countries are doing on that front. Then for WEP 2, which looks at equality in the workplace, we looked at a host of indicators, laws, conventions from the International Labor Organization, and programs around pay equity, care, maternity and paternity leave, support for caregivers, and the national action plans on business and human rights. And WEP 3, which has to do with health and well-being, and particularly in this case, with reducing violence against women, we looked at conventions around violence and harassment, but we also looked at legislation specifically on sexual harassment in the workplace, as well as the Tripartite Declaration of Multinational Enterprises, which is an ILO-led initiative that looks at bringing together workers groups, the private sector and the public sector. Next slide. For WEP 4, which has to do with women's professional development, we looked at national level initiatives that are supporting women's leadership in the private sector or in non-traditional vocations like science, technology, engineering, and math fields. And WEP 5 has to do with enterprise development. So in the private sector, this has to do with how companies can develop supplier diversity initiatives so they buy more from women, right? And they identify how much they're buying from women. In the public sector, because and for ASEAN, this is a priority, SME development, we looked at a host of indicators. So we looked at financial inclusion strategies and how they include gender or they don't. We looked at national gender responsive procurement programs, programs that are seeking to spend more from women. And we also looked at laws around owning a business and inequalities in those laws. Next slide, please. And finally, we looked at, okay, well, what's WEP 6 has to do with community initiatives and advocacy. So we looked at public and private sector initiatives that are jointly promoting gender equality in the private sector. And then WEP 7 is basically looking at mandates for reporting. So they're very important for this report around gender equality, which really means in the region, it really means the few countries that are mandating any reporting and action on this front, it has to do with women on boards, like Malaysia's quota. Next slide. So for each of these areas and sub areas, we provide an assessment. Basically, prioritize means that the country is probably maybe taking a little bit of action, but still has a lot of room for growth. Deepen means that they're taking actions, but there's probably some key actions that haven't been taken. And sustain means that they're likely taking most of the key actions, but there might still be a little room for growth as well. And so we provide that for each sub area and each WEP. We provide an assessment to provide some guidance for the future. Next slide. And so here you can see what it might look like. You can see that, for example, we're able to identify that in the category WEP 3 that has to do with violence against women and sexual harassment, there's quite a bit of room for growth in the region. Again, sometimes it has to do, you know, we break this down and we don't have time to go through all of it right now. But right now, what we're going to do is tell you a little bit about the findings that we got. So next slide. But the report will be able to provide this in detail, and you'll be able to look at how countries are doing by looking at these sample scorecards that we have for each country, right? So each country will get a scorecard, and you'll be able to see how it's doing and some recommendations for action. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so that was a handful, right? So, but what did we find after looking at all of this? Well, we found that countries are committed, right? All of them have signed the CEDAW, but not, you know, there's definitely multiple ILO conventions that haven't been ratified by multiple countries in the region. And these are around gender equality, workers' rights, etc. So there's definitely room for growth there. We also found that about half the countries have some sort of gender responsive legal instruments, national strategies, etc. So, and then there's room for growth there as well. Next slide. The laws in the books are pretty good as far as mandating equal remuneration for work of equal value. But we also know that obviously the law is the first step and that we still have a gender pay gap in Asia of about 15%. Also, half the countries have paid maternal leave of at least 14 weeks. But obviously half the countries do not have that. And that's the international standard for maternity leave. And then a lot of countries might have that, but they don't go beyond that with some holistic legislation or programs to support caregivers in the workforce. Next slide. Most member states do have specific legislation on sexual harassment in the workplace, but some still don't. And very few of the countries were reporting on national level initiatives to get women in the private sector, right? There's multiple initiatives to promote women in the public sector, but not necessarily in the private sector. And again, this methodology looks at things that are reported on very publicly. So, so if there's something missing, it might not be reported on by the country in the places that we identified for the methodology. Next slide. So as far as enterprise development, SME development, no countries have legislation to promote gender-responsive procurement. And this compares with the private sector, where only 4% of companies that report data to UN Women track percentage spend with women-owned businesses. There are multiple private sector initiatives to promote gender equality in the private sector, but the participation of either workers groups or the public sector is limited in them. But there are some initiatives that are doing so. And finally, we know that Malaysia has a quota and a mandate for reporting on the percentage of women on boards, and that some countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and Singapore are providing guidance or have mandates for gender reporting in annual sustainability reporting and ESG reporting in general. So that's a snapshot of some of the findings that we have. And now we're going to go relatively quickly through the private sector and what did the private sector tell us, and what did the data in the private sector. So we looked at, again, the 75 publicly listed companies, and the reason we looked at publicly listed companies is because they have to provide public information. They have reporting requirements, and regulators have influence over what they report. We found that only 4 of the publicly listed companies have signed the Women's Empowerment Principles. 201 have signed them in the region, but of these top companies we looked at, only 4 had done it. And it's not like we found other public commitments on gender equality, right? So there's a lack of public commitments around gender equality. 55% are disclosing sex-segregated workforce data. But this has to do with the Global Reporting Initiative, which is international standards for reporting on a variety of issues, and that the fact that the indicator that they have for workforce for companies providing their workforce is sex segregated. So that's why they do that. Next slide. Very few report on their actual pay gaps in the company, but about a fourth report not having any gender disparities, right? So some companies are just saying, we don't have any gender disparities, but they're not saying what that assessment was or what that looks like. Only 13% report publicly on gender sensitive recruitment practices or retention. The next slide. And probably one of the most important findings, only one company that we looked at communicated having a sexual harassment reporting mechanism or taking actions on this front. So we're not even talking about the fact that they report on how many incidents they had and addressed, but just generally speaking, that the fact that they even have a protocol. And that's important because that would show commitment on this issue. And so no companies are really working on reporting on that. And finally, very few of them also reported having educational and professional development programs for women. And no companies reported having gender responsive procurement practices, which allow multinational companies are starting to report on, and it's becoming a trend, at least with certain multinational companies. Next slide. And finally, companies did report thinking about women and girls in their CSR activities. And just in general, less than half of the companies we looked at reported on any type of WEPs gender-related policy or action, right? So there's still a lot of room for growth. And finally, we looked at stock exchanges. And we obviously have a lot of stock exchanges that are participating in the ring the bell activities in the region. And again, as mentioned before, in Philippines, Indonesia, Singapore, and Malaysia, there's some sort of guidance on gender reporting as part of ESG guidance or specific guidance on gender reporting. And we're going to hear about that later today and the challenges on that front. And what's interesting in Singapore and in Malaysia is that there are programs that are targeted specifically at building or supporting the pipeline of women that can become women on boards, right? So obviously, if you think about Malaysia, they have a quota, but if you just place a quota but you don't prepare the pipeline, you might have an issue in being able to fill those spots. So that's behind the thinking there. Similarly, in Malaysia, there's also a few initiatives that are working to sensitize the private sector on the importance of these issues and publicly listed companies on gender and what actions they can take. Next slide. So finally, there's a series of recommendations that we will put forth in the report for the public sector, for the private sector, and then and a lot of the assessments that we did culminate in essential reporting indicators that we think private sector companies should at a minimum report on, and that public sector regulators, policymakers, as well as advocacy organizations can push, incentivize, and motivate the private sector to report on. We try to identify low-hanging fruit, but to push the envelope with those, and Katya will talk about that. So again, thank you. Happy to take any questions. We know that's a lot of content, and we'll be talking about it later today.
Thank you so much, Luis. I just wanted to also say this is a snapshot, and this is a sneak preview. And ILO and UN Women, who have really conducted this research together with Value for Women, will organize also a much deeper session and also more country-specific sessions. There was a question in the Q&A about this. Do we have data on industry specifics or country specifics? So there will be much more deeper sessions around that. So we just wanted to really give you a first sort of indication. But what we're gonna launch today and what is final and what we have to share today is excitingly something very clear and tangible and an actionable tool, is our new WEPs transparency and accountability framework, where a lot of people have contributed to. Particularly the research that we have just heard from has been one of the instruments that really helped us to inform this framework. But equally, we have been working with a lot of organizations like the GRI, EDGE, Investing in Women, who's in the room here, Amphoria, I've just seen their really industry association giving us inputs, our colleagues from the UN, obviously ILO and UNDP, many others have really sort of reviewed that and given us input, because we wanted to create something which is not a new tool and something in addition to something, but really reinforcing something what is existing out there and really just bringing it together into a very holistic framework. So you will be able to download this later. We're going to share the link in the chat so that is available for everyone. But let me just give you a quick introduction on what the framework is, and not being too technical. But the framework is really a guiding principle, or is a tool that looks across the 7 WEPs principles and sets linked to them a set of quantitative indicators to really measure the current situation, to set targets, and to really monitor your progress that you are doing. And it's applicable to all sectors. And it's a global tool, so it's not something only for Asia and Pacific, but we also have developed this in collaboration with our sister programs, actually, from WeEmpowerAsia in Latin America, WIN-WIN, and the G7 program in the G7 countries. So it's really a global and a universal tool. And as I said before, we've really aligned this to existing reporting initiatives like the GRI, linked obviously to the SDG framework, EDGE, Bloomberg, and many more. And also many of you, particularly the companies probably on the line today, know very well the tool that the WEPs have, which is the gender gap analysis tool, which really helps companies to really understand where they currently stand. And basically, this is the sort of next element to it. So the tool is also really linked and very much creates interlinkages between the assessment tool. After this, there will be an action planning tool that helps to really set you a clear plan. And this framework, the transparency and accountability framework, really helps you to measure and to monitor and to report on the progress. How does it look now concrete in terms of the indicators? Now, we don't have time today to go in every single indicator, and that's what the framework is for, and so you can have a look at this. I just want to give one highlight that we have looked into 2 big, or actually 3 big categories of indicators. So if you look at the bottom, is everything what helps you to really input to achieve the bigger or the upper part of the pyramid, which is 2 big categories. So one is essential reporting criteria. These are a set of 8 reporting indicators in 4 different areas: women in leadership, equal pay, equal opportunities in the workplace, and safe and inclusive workplaces. These are indicators from what we have seen, what we have heard from companies. These should be able to be reported by any company. Apart from equal pay is sometimes technically very difficult, but also there we have guidance on how to do this. But technically, there should be no reason why companies should not be able to report on this. The complementary indicators, which is the second category, are indicators that are, as the name says, complementing the essential ones, but are more specific. Some are to certain industries. Some are really indicators that we think are important to measure, but companies might have difficulties with their current reporting systems to report them. So this is a category we advocate for as well. But what we really would like to achieve is as many as possible companies really reporting on the 8 essential ones, because we know if that is happening, a big transformation is gonna happen for women in the world of work. So this is the framework, and very practical, explained also, and you will see in the framework as well on our webs.org website. There are opportunities for the members, particularly of the WEPs community, to also publicly or internally in the first step to report their indicators. So something very practical that we are pleased to share today. Having said that, I think there was a lot of technical input, but we thought it would be really good to really set the scene and to share with you something very concrete before we actually go into a conversation. Now, does it make it really sense? Do we need accountability and transparency frameworks? We have seen this year on International Women's Day, a lot of action is happening. Are we on a good journey? Things are happening, but do we really know what's happening? Do we really see? Do we have data? Do we measure it? Do you know in your organizations how much progress have you made? These are all important questions to be asked. And I'm excited that we have a very diverse panel today, not only gender diverse, geographically diverse, but particularly also diverse from different sectors or from different areas where we feel that bring really different perspective into the very technical topic of accountability and transparency. So you see we have representation from the Asian Development Bank, we have the Stock Exchange Commission from Thailand, we have the Stock Exchange from the Philippines, we have an industry association from China, and we have a private sector company out of Indonesia. And behind these companies, or really drivers of gender equality, are 5 very engaging speakers today, and I would love to just make this more a conversation than actually a presentation moving forward. And I see there have been already questions in the Q&A, so please, I'm going to start off with some questions to the panel, but I would really love to see also questions from the audience, which we'll try to add into the conversation, but also at the end have some more time to really go a little bit deeper. So Anne, I'm going to turn it over to you. I see you have your hand up. I don't know if that's kind of, I want to speak right now, but that's great. So Anne Celestino is joining us from the Asian Development Bank, and she's a gender specialist in the private sector operations department. And she is really responsible in the Asian Development Bank for integrating gender analysis and measures into investments projects, but also into strategic and operational initiatives. And Anne has been working in the sector of financial institutions since 2013. So great to have you with us. And I hope we can unmute you. Yes, that works perfect. Before we get into all the technical things and what ADB is doing, I just want to start off with a very general questions. Having heard all of that, having seen the framework beforehand, how do you see that increased accountability and transparency will really benefit, in the first place, the women, but also businesses and society at large? Any perspective from you personally or as ADB, that does not matter.
Thank you very much, Katja. And let me just thank you, UN Women, the WeEmpowerAsia, and the partners for this event. Very honored to be part of the discussion today, along the fellow panelists. And also let me first wish all attendees a happy Women's Day celebration. So now to respond to your question on the why and how accountability and transparency bring benefits not only to women, but also to business and society. I would start with referring back to the statement that investing in women makes business sense. And you've just presented, and much evidence has been produced to promote gender inclusion in society, to promote how gender equality is critical to business performance and sustainable growth. And if you allow me just a quick couple of statistics to give the picture, is the estimated 21% higher profitability in firms with gender diversity on their executive teams, according to McKinsey, or the higher average returns for investors who are financing in companies with strong gender diversity strategies, as the Boston Consulting Group found out. So in other terms, adopting and reporting on gender measures is about becoming a future-ready business, I would say, that is able to attract the women labor market and tap into their potentials, but also to attract more capital, more investments. If you think about the total capital raised for gender lens investments, that has increased 4 times between 2017 and 2019. And a concrete example of this is the development finance founded 2X challenge that has alone mobilized $4.5 billion globally. But yet, this has not quite translated into practice, and at least not to the transformative scale required. And what comes next, I would say, is for more to take the jump, or simply the first step out of the business as usual into a more inclusive and new practices. And this is where the next interesting work begins, or this is where the connection between having gender indicators designed to improve women access to social, economic, financial resources on one hand, and the relevance of accountability and traceability, transparency on the other end comes in. I would really say that accountability has a key part here to shift from the narrative into the action mode. It triggers that step that I was mentioning of having the analysis action plan into making it happen. And traceability of the gender results plays the other part. It measures the progress. So it indicates if the promised efforts are rightly put into place, how much has been achieved, and what more can be done. So in essence, accountability makes it everyone's business on gender equality, and transparency makes it relevant to everyone. And yeah.
Can I just follow up? I love the statement, narrative into action. And I have to just very quick answer. ADB as an organization in this wider ecosystem, how do you incentivize governments or private sectors that you are working with to really advance their accountability and advance their actions? Anything to share on that?
Yes, definitely. Great question, great work that we're doing, and I think we're all involved in. And as a development finance partner, ADB finances both sovereign and private sector operations. So we have that dual mandate. And from this, I would see our role and that of other financial institutions threefold, if I can say. The first is to set the standards. And really, like at ADB, we have gender equality as one of our operational priorities. And over the past two decades, our approach has been to push for meaningful and transformative gender designs and reporting mechanisms through a robust gender system. Just to give you an idea that our current strategy 2030 has raised the standards to having 75% of all our operations, sovereign and non-sovereign, promoting at entry gender equality through a defined lens. And by applying our standards into our investments, our clients, governments or companies also agree to incorporate gender design in their own operations and commit to capture and report back on their gender indicators. And if you allow me just to give you an example of setting ambitious targets with clients. So in 2020, we worked with financial institutions in Georgia, PRC, Vietnam, and those financial institutions are really committed to growing their women-owned SME base, and they agreed to carving out up to 50% of the ADB financing to the market to that market segment, and we'll report on that. And further on reporting, a great example is our first ICT infrastructure project that has reached a highest classification for gender equality. And at completion in 2020, they were able to demonstrate their efforts leading to achieving 100% or 6 out of 6 of their gender targets, and having successfully implemented 80% of their gender activities. And that's because of the accountability system in place. And with such transparency, they were even able to disseminate the good practices in bridging the gender divide in the ICT sector. Now, secondly, the role that we have is also to bring the gender design on the agenda. And I think it's a crucial role for ADB and the like institution that we act as advocates on the why it matters. Why should governments and companies, financial institutions improve on their data capture and reporting? And this is exactly the kind of discussions we're having today. It is really to bring that case forward. And just third, very important, is our role to develop the incentives. And I would say ADB and financial institutions, development partners do that at 2 levels. One is the incentives in recognizing the industry leaders advancing gender equality. And the UN WEPs is a great example, how you promote companies and CEOs willing to make that commitments to empowerment. Other financial institutions have their landmark recognitions, and similarly, we at ADB, we have gender awards in our specific programs, such as Net Trade Finance Program and other gender design project awards. So it's very important for us to bring that visibility. And last is the incentives in building the sustainable businesses. We can provide assistance to improve the capacity of our clients to develop, implement, report on the gender indicators. And most probably the most talked about innovative practice across the development finance ecosystem is the increasing use of these investment screening tools that are used to assess the gender impact, the opportunities, and support decision making. And this is what we just learned today about the tool from UN Women, a great framework in that sense. You have the 2X criteria being one of the most common references. We also at ADB have just developed an ADB gender equality scorecard, and you have a range of market actors, investors, and others that do that. So let me conclude here.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you so much. And that was very insightful. And you were talking about one of your responsibilities about setting standards. And it's actually a really great transition into our next speaker as well. I'm really pleased to have Ms. Gwenwadi Suwan-Mongol with us. She is the Secretary General of the Security and Exchange Commission of Thailand. And she has, I'm not going to read them all out, so many diplomas and recognitions on different universities, but also served in different ministries in Thailand. And I just wanted to, before I get into questions, Gwenwadi, I just wanted to share like one statement she shared with me before when we had like the initial discussion here. And she said, we need to get started somewhere. We need to just move forward. And I really like that spirit of action. And I've heard this the second time today, I think, from narrative into action. And these were exactly the words from Gwenwadi. Thank you for being with us, and I know you're a bit time pressured. So can you just help us to understand in this whole ecosystem the role of the security exchange commissions to create more accountability and transparency of business? And if you have any examples to share, that would be great. Over to you, Gwenwadi. Thank you.
Thank you, Katia. And then good afternoon and good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure. First of all, I have to thanks to UN Women and We Empower Asia also for inviting me to share experience and some input. And happy the International Women's Days that we have. I think it's not a bit too late. It's still in a week, you know, just today after. And also, I mean, I'm very honored to be in this session together with other distinguished speakers. Thank you for your kind introduction. As I mentioned to you, that I've been told, talking about if make something happen, you have to take a move like wait and see, you know, and also make a movement. And also, I think that step by step, you don't want to give any pressure at all at the first day, you know, progressive development like that. The role of SEC, you know, like in other countries, we are regulator and facilitator. We not only look into the security business, but we want to ensure that listed company to be a responsible citizen of the country and of the world, As you see, we rather take approach of the market mechanism, self-discipline, and regulation at last. We want things to be done by their own willingness, Katia, because if you put so many regulation, perhaps they might not observe on that very well, but if you want to ask them and make them see the necessity about the sustainability and their profitability in the long run, they might buy in, they might buy in. For us, as I said, we move along. If you go back 20 years back, I joined the SEC at the first stage. We set the tone of CSR, and then we move forward to corporate governance for listed company, and we move forward to we call the institutional investment, make sure that institutional investor make a commitment to select a good, a responsible, shares. And now we in the phase of so-called ESG, environment, social, and governance, For us right now, for sure, talking about gender, we put it as voluntary back in 2017. We asked this company to consider to have board diversity in the boardroom to make sure diverse opinion, diverse feedbacks from the gender would be take part on the commitment on the growth of the company. And right now, we also move along to the climate change action. Perhaps if I look at the research, thank for making a research, we perhaps not a bit too late, but starting from next year onward, talking about transparency, we would first require all listed company, no matter size they are, have to put up so-called ESG report for the first time, and then in this one, it captures all the element of the climate change, element of the gender, and perhaps vulnerable group on that, and last but not least, about good governance on that. And so happy to see the excitement of the company themselves now. They move forward on that. Some big firm, even early adoption, having a very comprehensive sustainability report to begin with. I think that we move, we buy in them already to see the necessity on that. Move along to about how to make sure that the standard, they understand the standard of ESG. We'll build up and work together with educational university here about setting the standard to be a local reviewer or something like that as a what we call technical assistant for the company to work along on that.
Thank you so much, Kunu and Vati, not only for your spirit and kind of action-oriented, appealing to all of us here, but also sharing where you are in the journey. And I think this is also finding we had in the research, and Luis shared this before, that a lot of the security commissions and stock exchanges, and we're going to bring the stock exchanges into this conversation in a second, are really early on in the conversations and really early on in, particularly when it comes to accountability and transparency linked to gender. And you mentioned there are some really promising practices on climate, environmental indicators, which have sort of moved really the ESG agenda as well. But if it comes to gender, as you rightly said, very often it's still voluntarily. Very often it's, in good cases, what we have seen in the research is reporting on women in boards, which is a good first step.
Yes.
But it needs to be a really more integrated conversation. I would like to bring Attorney Ruel in the conversation from the stock exchange in the Philippines. And I know you have to leave for another meeting and join us.
Can I have another minute, Katia?
Of
Can
course.
I have a minute? Thank you. And about the gender, sorry, I think I forgot to mention in the beginning. What I say now, we quite achieve at the moment. We have about 25% already of the total director as a female. And right now we work together, we work together with the related parties. We're quite ambitious to begin with. By next year, we hope that at least 1/3 of the board should be women, one woman, 1/3, 1/3 of the board be women. And not only to put up that number, but we have to ensure we have adequate supply, potential women to be able to be select or elect. So that we want right now to work together to cultivate skill and have all the women CEO as their role model to help coaching on that. Last week, I kicked off the very first one, the female CEO dialogue. We had successful at least 30 CEO women of major listed company to share their vision and set a network. And they totally agree that we have to believe in the power and then have confidence that we can do. And they said they make a pledge that whatever ACC want to move forward on gender, they go along and they support. I think that I get this message from them all and then help my day so much that whatever I want to go along with this, I have collaboration from the private sector. This is quite a key, private sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing this. And I'm not going to go directly to the private sector because there are still some bridges to be made till we get to our private sector partners. But you mentioned very much sort of the importance to work. On the one hand, I think really important to highlight in your own organizations to make sure that your own organizations are diverse. I think that's the first step. But then also you mentioned very rightly the connection to the listed companies and working with them and not just imposing reporting criteria, but really also showing pathways on how to achieve them. And I think this is a really good transition to our next speaker, who is joining us from the Philippines. And as you can see in his background, he's joining us from a stock exchange. A very warm welcome, Attorney Ruel Rafran, who is the Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Philippine Stock Exchange. And equally, he has a lot of experience in that space and has a lot of not only diplomas, but is also a lecturer at many universities, which I think is a really important element to bring to really create a next generation that really grows up with a much more inclusive picture. So thank you for joining us today and agreeing to the fact to share us a little bit more about, first of all, enlightening us for the ones that are technically maybe not so into all of this area, but really helping us to understand how the Security Exchange Commissions and the stock exchanges work together, and then also share with us a little bit where you are honestly on your journey when it comes to ESG reporting, when it comes to gender reporting in the Philippines. Yeah, let's start with that, Attorney Ruel.
Good afternoon, good morning, wherever our participants may be. It's definitely, as you said, Katya, very busy week for everyone. And I think we are all marching to the same beat, and that is really championing gender equality, diversity, and on a very big macro level, really sustainable finance. So stock markets operators around the world, as well as securities regulators, actually have a very effective framework on how they could best incentivize, I would always use that word, incentivize its various stakeholders to be more, I would say, to be more attuned to the must report information, right? There will always be shades of gray when you look at financial information. And that has always been the plumbing of financial markets, right? The market data out there, the investors, institutionals, publicly listed companies, they gravitate towards financial information. And I think when you talk about the sustainable finance initiatives, a lot of attention has been on the E and on the G, I must say, at least that's from our perspective. And we see the S component under which gender equality would really be at the front and center to actually be very, in our part of the world, still at a very early stage, but equally, if not more important than other factors, non-financial factors, simply because as we have seen in the market, the quality of the disclosure has to also reflect at the very core opportunities for employment, the leaves that actually do not discriminate, your facilities to allow for work-life balance for a lot of our female employees, and opportunities for advancement, leadership. And so we in the PSE, together with our regulator, the SEC, because we are denominated to be a self-regulatory organization, we come up with our own rules by way of incentivizing and really encouraging a lot of our corporates to advance on a voluntary basis, and over time could also be a required disclosure, not just in the current information reports, but also probably as it impacts financial reports. So we're part of this initiative in the ASEAN markets, ASEAN exchanges, Thailand Stock Exchange, very active as well when you talk about the sustainable finance environment. But I think our trust is to actively engage. No? There are various modalities by which we could engage with stakeholders, because we see that a very important role we play is we can champion these discussions in as much as there could probably be already early innovators amongst our publicly listed companies. But the goal is for the water to rise so that all ships will eventually float higher, and everyone will benefit in the long run. So it's not a zero-sum ball game as is usually the case in financial markets, but net positive for everyone, right? For example, the importance of the women empowerment principles. By the way, the exchange, the Philippine Stock Exchange, was actually among the very first signatories in the region to sign off and on a commitment to support the WEPs back in March of 2020. And we felt that this has to be a strategic discussion and more than just an oh by the way discussion. And so we have come up with our own ESG with emphasis on the environmental, especially the sustainability, social discussions, and pairing that with the governance framework as well. So that's us as also a publicly listed company, but as I mentioned a while ago, the role modeling and the importance of championing this advocacy really cannot be more, I would say, more urgent now as we see different stories from different regions. The narrative has to change. We have to reorient the financial markets away from the traditional financial, but more so the must-have frameworks. And I think we are as much learning from this discussion as probably the other participants, because at the end of the day, the experiences in other parts of the world, we'd like to draw from that, and together with what the other stakeholders would like or are seeing. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel always, right? As regulators, you want to probably customize as you have seen what works in other markets. So capacity building, active engagement, and eventually scaling up. No? I think that's the last leg we've seen. You scale up through probably encouraging, for example, when there is a fundraising activity, a listing, an initial public offering, to highlight the risks as well as the mitigants of that risk. When you look at the E, S, and the G, as well as probably bright areas, bright spots on how that company can differentiate itself. Because at the end of the day, the comparative and the competitive advantage would always be very important for fundraising purposes. So that's our view on the discussion and the narrative. We are one with everyone in this discussion simply because it is very, very relevant, if not very much a game changer. And this is not just something that will come and pass by. It's changing the landscape for a lot of the stakeholders.
Thank you so much, Will, and sorry that we dropped out a little bit through our weak internet here. But I think you've mentioned a couple of really important areas, from voluntarily to mandatory, that is all journeys and takes time. But I think what I really like and really appreciate, particularly, is very openly sharing that you are early on in the journey, and also publicly saying on the social element, we have to do more, we need to really advance, and certainly gender, which is very often embedded there. We have a long way to go. And I think the first step of accountability and transparency is actually seeing it and recognizing this. And I think really sort of documenting this would be the next step, and really seeing that we have a baseline in the stock exchanges, but also at the company level themselves. So I really appreciate this, and thank you so much, Will, for sharing this very honest perspective. And I think there's a lot we can do to bring the different stock exchanges and players in the region together and learn from each other. Definitely something to do. But I think what is also a very positive element is it does not lay only in the hands of the stock exchanges nor the security commissions, but there are many more players that really can help to advance the journey. For example, also industry associations who really work with multiple members who have a big grip on industries, or sometimes really across industries, certain trade associations. And I'm really pleased that we have also someone here who is not from the ASEAN region and joining us. And that was also one of the questions. Yes, we have also data on different geographies and not only on ASEAN. A very warm welcome, Ms. Lin Bo, who is joining us from China, as I said, and is the Deputy Secretary General of the Committee on Social Responsibility for the China Electronics Standardization Association. And Lin has a long experience in the field of corporate social responsibility, more than 17 years, and has been awarded for something what we're going to be talking about today as well, on her inputs into the guidance on social responsibility and of information, and on the guidance on social responsibility of the information and communication technology industry in China. And this is an industry we have been working very closely with our team of UN Women also in the China office, particularly because it is such an industry where women unfortunately still are very much underrepresented. So we are really thrilled to have you with us. And we would really love to hear a little bit more, very practical, what you have done actually to really integrate the women's empowerment principles already in your CSR guidance. So we are not talking about a vision or something, we're talking about something really concrete. And I really would love to hear from you if you could share a little bit more how you have done this and a concrete example. And I think you will be speaking in Chinese to us, and we will have our colleagues from UN Women China to translate. So over to you, Lin.
Okay, thank you. It's my pleasure to take part in this panel. As my English is limited, so I invite Jingyi translate for me. I will answer in Chinese. 在中国，就是我们知道，就是这个性别在这个电子信息行业里边是非常重要的。我们也是采取了一个修改了我们的这样一个标准的这样一个办法来引导。就是我们的性别平等在电子信息行业里边的这样一个落地。我们的这个标准呢，它不是简单的是一个倡议，它实际上呢也是一个评估的这样一个指标体系。那我们每年呢，我们会评估大概200多家中国企业，在电子信息行业里边呢，这200多家企业都是非常优秀和顶尖的企业，其中有100家呢是中国政府指定的。那在这个标准修改了之后呢，这些在性别平等方面做的比较好的企业， 他们的这样一个得分就会更高。如果说他们在性别平等方面做的不太好的话呢，他的整体的这个分数就会相对的会低一些。这是一个就是我们在行业里边来促进我们性别平等的一个重要的方法。那这个标准的修改呢，我们也是跟我们的一些专家以及这个行业中的代表的这样一些企业还有政府一起来商讨来制定的。谢谢。
So the guidance is not just an initiative, it really is a standard. In order to promote gender equality in the electronics industry, we, together with gender experts and leading ICT companies, added a gender dimension to the CSR guidance and integrated a gender perspective into previous indicators. Each year, 200 top ICT companies in China are chosen to be evaluated on their CSR performance. And also, these include like 100 companies designated by the Chinese government. With this new guidance, companies with good gender equality performance would receive a higher score. To give you a more concrete example, under the category community development, the companies that support local women's employment would earn an extra point. That's all.
Sorry, I was talking on mute. Thank you very much, Ginny. Just bringing this also back into sort of the WEPs framework. You mentioned just the community measurement indicators or the points there. So this is also one of the principles, obviously, for the women's empowerment principles, to invest in more community activities benefiting women. But listen, I have a last question I would like to ask you. Is very much in terms of how do you keep your members motivated to report on this? How do you incentivize to measure their progress?
谢谢。首先呢，就是我们认为激励会员一个非常重要的途径是就是让他来参与我们的这样一个评选。就是在这样一个评选当中呢，他如果做得很好的话，他的分数会比较高。这是一个方面。另外一个方面呢，就是我们会安排培训，还有1对1的这样一个对企业的单独的辅导。我们希望能够告诉他们，就是尤其是在电子信息行业当中，性别平等它是能够激发创新的，它对于企业自身的这个发展也是有非常大的这样一个好处的。我目前呢，就是碰到的一个比较大的一个挑战呢，就是我们还是有一些企业呢，它并没有意识到，性别平等其实对于企业的这个生产力的提高本身是有很大的好处的，是能够促进它的这样一个经济的收益的。他们呢现在还是在一个被动的完成任务式的这样一个阶段当中，所以我们未来呢，我们需要进一步的扩大我们的这样一个宣传和培训，以激励他们更多的来参与到我们的这样一个行动中来。谢谢。
Thank you for the question. On the one hand, the guidance is used to grade companies' CSR performance, and the results will be made public. If a company wants a higher score, they need to do more in promoting gender equality. On the other hand, we arrange trainings and provide one-on-one consulting service to companies so they know more about gender and understand its importance, so they become more motivated to improve their work in this area. We do face challenges though. For example, many companies are not aware of the business case of gender equality. For example, the economic benefits of gender equality. So there is a lack of inner motivation, meaning the company's actions are taken under external constraints, which is unsustainable. Their actions are quite passive. So to address this, we need to strengthen advocacy and arrange more trainings.
Thank you very much, and a very nice transition into really understanding what is the business case. And I think this is a very important motivational factor for businesses. And we will ask our next speaker, Mr. Ernest Hudagalung, who is the Chief Financial Officer for Telekom Telstra in Indonesia. And he has been working in the industry for more than 25 years in different industries, not only in telecoms, Telstra, but in oil, gas, mining, manufacturing. So I think we have a good representative and voice with a lot of experience on how does the private sector tick. But we are extremely pleased that Mr. Ernest is going to share with us today some more experience that he has made with his current company, with Telecom Telstra, and particularly on implementing a more holistic gender strategy with a very strong accountability and transparency framework. He has shared with us before, and I'm sure he's going to be talking a little bit more about this. They have been collaborating with an organization called Investing in Women, with who we are also closely working with in Indonesia and in other countries to really help them and work together on an assessment, on a strategy, and on a measurement tool afterwards as well. So would love to hear a little bit more from you. What was the journey from Telecom Telstra, and what has changed in your organization, and how does this really materialize into benefits for your employees? And it would be great to hear a little bit more, especially on how the work of accountability and transparency has really supported that. So over to you, and share us a little bit more about your journey. You're still on mute, Mr. Ernest.
Yeah, thank you, Katja. Good afternoon and good morning. Well, we are in the Telecom Telstra is a joint venture of Telkom Indonesia and Telstra Australia, but we are in IT industry. So STEM industry, I think worldwide participation of women is still low, just like at 20%. And even, of course, in Indonesia, either the same or maybe lower than that. So as a company on the ground, we would like to have more and more talent, especially a female talent. So that's why since the beginning of the joint venture, we already set the target for the female employees. So we set a target, and then in doing this, basically we have a sort of we work with Business Coalition of Women in Indonesia, IBCW, and basically we set a target, we have the commitment, and we track the commitment on a regular basis, just to make sure that we move on the right direction. Is it possible to share the slide, Katja? The one slide?
Yes, we'll do this. Here we go.
Yeah. So yeah. So basically, I would like to share the Telecom's journey here as a company. We really need the talents, the female talents. That's why we really fight for this this journey. So what we've done basically, this is the principle number 7 on the women's empowerment principle. Also, what we implement, there is 5 steps that we put on the measurement and reporting. So this for transparency, we set the target to make sure that we walk the talk. The number one is that the first step is setting the context. So setting the context, this will be the foundation of the underlies why diversity and inclusion is an important part of the company's business strategy. And then move to the second step there, when collecting the data and facts. Data collection was carried out through data from HR department related to the participation of female employees in the recruitment process, promotion, training, even also we check the attrition rate for the female employees. And other data sources there we'll obtain through this our employee engagement survey and also other internal survey. And aim is to obtain valuable information, especially from our female employees. Other information channels are available through HR clinics, anonymous boxes, even we use the whistleblower channels. There are also other channels that can be used to get input, such as from IT and feedback form. On the third stage there, this is the selection of tools and methodologies that will be used to process and analyze the data to obtain insight. So we work with Business Coalition for Women Empowerment, IBCW. So we call this the assessment, the gears. This is the gender equality assessment, result, and strategy. from GEARS, there are many findings that are still required to be addressed in the future in our company. So these findings from GEARS are the main basis for our diversity and inclusion initiative and program for this year. And we put this as part of our annual operating plan for 2021. One of the interesting findings that we found is that the attrition rate of female employees who resigned from the company last year was 10%. And from this number, we dig down deeper, and 16% of female employees who resigned were due to family reason. And it turned out that 75% of female employees who resigned for family reason were young mothers who had just given birth to the first child. They have to give up their careers because they need to stay at home in caring for and raising children. So it is necessary to look for initiative, programs, and solutions in the company to reduce the attrition of women talent who possess the ability and potential to be developed into future leaders of the company. And then under step number 4 is that this is that we report the result of the analysis. Yeah. So just like we set the target that 6 years ago that at least we must have 30% female employees percentage from the total employee. So last year we've achieved 35% from the total. However, when we move to area where the women still underrepresented, we find different result. Just like in the IT department, in the product team, target 30%, but after 6 years, we still at the 23%. Although from the 6 years ago, it increased from 16% to 25%, but we still below the target. The same also at the leadership, we still have still 23% as compared to the target. So and then the last step that we use is that to ensure the measurement and reporting process is done consistently, periodically, and continuously. So measurement and reporting need to be carried out continuously, and important findings need to be follow up through concrete step from the company to find solutions. So in our case, in our company, we form a team called Diversity and Inclusion Champion. So this team will develop programs and action plans for this year on how to address all of the findings that we got from the years, from all of the area that need to be improved, that will help us basically to improve the diversity and inclusion, so to increase women empowerment also in the company. Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing this, Ernest. I think one thing I wanted to highlight on is you were talking about you lost talent, you lost women, particularly when they started to form families. One of our indicators, which we have put in the essential indicators in the top 8 we mentioned before, we had a lot of discussion around this, was actually really the retention rate of employees disaggregated by sex, because this is a very, very important indicator to really understand if you're losing women or not, because very often the entry rate and getting women into the workforce, we have really make major steps in Asia and the Pacific here. But I think it's really these retention rates that will make a difference. And I think it's great that you are measuring this and really gives a good indication for others as well. I have some follow-up questions that we've received from the audience, and one is a little bit twofold. It's going to go to Anne and to Ernest. So Ernest, I'm going to ask you first in terms of how can we mobilize other companies like yours to really take this forward and to become more serious about not only gender equality, but become really serious about reporting on it. What could you recommend as one of the questions?
So this is the question to me, Katja?
Yes, that's the first question to you.
All right, it's a very good question. So actually, number one, when we run the business and we have our customer and end customer, let's say product or services, and your customer, maybe 50% or even more than 50%, they are women, right? So that's why equality means business, because it makes it easier to understand your customer if you have also more female employees. So then by having this, of course, you can create solution, you create product to your customer, then you can win the competition if you can sell more. And the other point that I mentioned is that by having this gender equality within your company, you can attract and retain more talent, especially top female talent. I would also say that nowadays gender equality also will help increase the reputation, the brand image of the company. And last point that I would like to mention here, this is specific to IT industry where we are in the company. We believe that it will boost innovation because the diversity of mindset and knowledge will drive more diverse and user-centric ideas and solutions, right? So when we have more the participation of female employees, of course, we will have a diverse and more ideas come to the table. So this will really help the company. So that's my argument that actually equality means business, because if we really go for this, if we really support this, the women empowerment, gender equality, that's sort of a result. That's my argument to support that this is the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ernest, and that makes actually the circle around. We are almost at the end, and Anne started us off with the session or the conversation on the business case and giving us some really enlightening facts and figures about this. And I'm going to close off also to put a question to Anne, which we got from the audience, on how to motivate SME owners to report gender indicators, which normally is very time consuming. Some small companies might not have a well-developed monitoring and reporting system. They prefer to see short-term business returns. So how long will it take for SMEs to see the return, and how can we mobilize and motivate them to report on gender indicators? And would you like to take that one?
Yes, thank you, Katja, and thank you for the question. I think this is one of the most relevant and common questions we have when we engage with the clients. So completely on the point of the why and how to incentivize. And if I can just say in the contrary, how to take the mindset on the other side. Gender indicators can have rapid returns. And I think if you look at the indicators regarding the workforce, the enabling work environment, where you put that in place, that has immediate returns in terms of the productivity of women, the less absenteeisms, the motivation, the general work environment makes it more conducive. So then you get your outputs of the work directly. Similarly, when you look at your you have gender indicators in your distributors or the suppliers, you also build a stronger diversity in your inputs, and that has a direct immediate impact on your business or day-to-day business. So it's to look at that gender equality in that aspect as well, and how do you embed it in your business. And that's where the SME is really probably what we see as the most agile way to come in, because you don't have the systems built or established. So you have more leverage on it doesn't require much to change the system if it's not in place. And once it's embedded in your core business, it doesn't take time. It's part of the regular tracking of your regular business data and processes. And that's how to go. It's about being at the core business and not the side or have something good to do. And that's when. And the next will be on the longer term, the access to business. And that's where as ADB and different finance come in to enable more businesses to get more return and better access to finance.
Thank you very much. And I think we can close the conversation here with a common statement on making sure that gender is core in everything what you report on. If it comes to, if we speak about business reporting, it's not a sidelined or a by the way reporting. It should be really embraced and part of your business and sustainability reporting as a company. We have 1 more minute, and I just want to use this, share with you again the framework. So we're going to put a link in the chat here. We're going to also send a follow-up to all the participants here. But I also want to take the opportunity and just say a huge thank you to the panelists, but also to the active audience. We had quite some questions which I weaved in, and some of them we answered. So a huge thank you for that. Have a look at our framework here, but also be aware that this is the start of a series, as I said in the beginning. And in order to really inform this a little bit more, please stay on one more minute. We're going to have like 3 questions to just help us to also improve the sessions moving forward. And I also just want to say for the companies on the call, and Anne mentioned it before, awarding and recognizing is really important. So we're going to also have this year the 2nd edition of the UN Women WEPs Awards, where we're going to have a launch event on the 21st of April. You're warmly welcome to join that launch event, where we will also recognize new signatories of the WEPs and kick us off for an exciting 2021 with the WEPs Awards. So a huge thank you, and please take a minute to just answer 3 questions here. No need for survey, no need for Slido. I think we're just going to do 3 quick Zoom questions, and that's just for our internal use. So please help us to get some feedback. There we go. Come on, that's also for us who have organized this year, the speakers here. It would be good to get really honest feedback to just kind of see on how we can take this forward. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. So it seems it has been a beneficial session. It is very difficult to speak about topics like accountability and transparency in an engaging way, but I feel our panel has done an excellent job. Let's move on. Maybe do we have the 2nd question? They're all at the same time. Great. So we're just going to keep the results for us, but it looks like most of you have benefited from the session, which is great. So thank you very much, everyone. And you can be assured we're going to continue the conversation and keep you involved in that. Thank you on behalf of WeEmpowerAsia.